Matt Cunningham, Sky News, Darwin.
For more now, joining us live from Brisbane is the Queensland RSL President, Stewart Cameron. Stewart Cameron, good to see you. Thank you for your time. We did hear a lot of warnings. We knew that security was going to be high around the country as these services took place today. Considering the threats of terrorism we've heard so much about and that authorities have been concerned about, were you encouraged to see the crowd numbers today, not just there in Brisbane, but around the country?
Ashley, first of all, good evening to you and your viewers. Look, the crowds were magnificent, not just here in Brisbane, but as you've just said, across the country, from the capital cities all the way down to small towns. It's incredibly pleasing to see the large numbers of people coming out to commemorate Anzac Day.
We all do pause today, of course, to pay our respects to the dead and to the veterans today. But on the other 364 days of the year, what are the biggest issues facing our veterans?
I think for those men and women who have come back either physically or psychologically injured, I think the community has to acknowledge that we have an obligation to think of these men not just on Anzac Day or Remembrance Day. The reality is that these men and women need our support 365 days of the year. And I would like to see the Australian community come together to support these men and women. They are our neighbours. They live amongst us, and our neighbours will know when they've got problems. And on those occasions, come and talk to us so we can go out and help these men and women.
Yeah, there's the community side, but also, I guess, government side as well. There's been a big focus, I know, on veteran suicide rates and mental health. Are we giving veterans enough financial support, enough sort of services support, do you think?
Look, it's a vexed issue, and I don't want to be drawn on specifics, but I think in general terms, we as a community have an obligation to look after these men and women. At the end of the day, they've gone and done things that the average Australian would never, ever appreciate. So governments of all persuasions at all levels have a responsibility to look after those men and women who've come back from conflicts.
Well, the budget, of course, as we all know, is going to be handed down in a couple of weeks. We've seen all of our ministers out and about at Anzac services today. But what would you like to see them commit to in terms of funding for veterans' causes? What would be on the RSL's budget wish list? Do you have one?
Look, firstly, what I'd like our legislators to do is stop and think, stop and appreciate what support that these people need. We've gone from an environment not so long ago in the life of the Parliament where the Senate and the House were comprised mainly of returned men and then returned men and women. We now have an environment where the vast majority of our legislators have never served in the military, have no great appreciation of military service. And I think that's one of the things that they need to do. They need to engage the veteran community very widely before they decide on legislation. Look, at the end of the day, probably the government's never going to have enough money. So it becomes a matter of prioritising resources. But having said that, the ex-service community, the government, the community coming together, I think we can do wonderful work to support those men and women who need our help.
Yeah, look, as you point out, a lot of us have no idea of the reality of war, of what it really means to go and serve your country. With your background, explain to us, if there's one significant thing you want all of us to take away from today, and we've seen people all around the country turn out to marches. Right now, thousands of people are still out in pubs playing two-up and having a drink to commemorate and also, I guess, celebrate in some way as well. What would you like everyone to take away from today?
I would like the community to take away the view that they have an obligation, and that obligation is across the year. It's not just on today or Remembrance Day. And yes, we've got thousands of servicemen and women and former servicemen and women marching today, but we've also got many more thousands who have not come out, and they have reasons for that. I mean, I was contacted last night around a young Afghan veteran who is suffering post-traumatic stress. This was his first Anzac Day, and he wasn't confident that he would be able to get through the day. Well, the good news, of course, was that he did. He waited until his unit marched past and then he went home. That, to me, is the issue. We have to understand that we have a large number of men and women who need our help, who are hidden to us, and we need to bring them out so we can help them.
Stewart Cameron, the RSL president there in Queensland, appreciate your time with us on Anzac night. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
And Ken.